In the last 24 hours, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense says it has tracked 24 Chinese military aircraft and 17 warships moving through the Taiwan Strait. Every day, Beijing pushes a little further. But what would really happen if China decided to invade Taiwan tomorrow? And how would America respond? This is not about fear. It is about being prepared. Analyzing possible scenarios is not alarmism. It is the first step to avoiding them. And right now, Taiwan is no longer just a distant flashpoint on a map. It is becoming the place where the world's next great war could begin. In the past few weeks, as reported by Reuters and the BBC, Taiwan's military has tracked dozens of Chinese warships and hundreds of military aircraft operating in and around the strait. Beijing calls them exercises, but they look less like training and more like rehearsals. Each flight crosses Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, the ADIZ, a monitored buffer where foreign aircraft must identify themselves. It is not sovereign airspace, but it is a tripwire. And tripwires are how wars start. Before we explore what could happen if China invaded Taiwan, we need to understand why this island matters so much. In this video, we will first explain why Taiwan matters, then show how the pressure is building day by day, and finally walk through the three most likely scenarios if Beijing gave the order to attack. Along the way, we will show how each of these scenarios could ripple across the United States and how America might respond. If you want to understand how a war on the far side of the Pacific could reshape life inside the United States, stay with us until the end. And if you have not yet, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. Taiwan is not just an island on the map. It is the unfinished chapter of China's civil war, the one the Communist Party calls a renegade province that must be brought back under Beijing's control. For the Chinese leadership, it is not a choice, it is a mission. And that mission has become more urgent as China's power has grown. The Taiwan Strait is also one of the most strategic waterways on Earth. Nearly half of the world's container ships pass through it every year, carrying oil, food, and critical parts to and from Asia. Whoever controls Taiwan controls that artery. But the island is more than a shipping checkpoint. It is the heart of the global semiconductor industry. Those tiny chips that run your phone, your car, your bank, your hospital. Taiwan produces more than 90% of the world's most advanced ones through a company called TSMC. And without them, modern life stops. This is why the United States cannot ignore Taiwan. It is not just about defending democracy. It is about defending the backbone of the entire global economy and the security architecture of the Pacific. If Taiwan falls, Japan and South Korea could be next in line. And American bases across the region would suddenly be surrounded instead of protected. For Beijing, Taiwan is unfinished business. For Washington, it is the keystone holding the whole Indo-Pacific arch together. And if it breaks, everything around it begins to crumble. Before we can understand what would happen if China actually invaded Taiwan, we need to understand the pressure that is already pushing the two sides closer to open conflict than at any point in decades. Because this pressure is not background noise, it is the fuse. Over the past 3 weeks, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense has reported more than 270 Chinese military aircraft and nearly 150 warships operating around the island. These are not isolated incidents, they are coordinated actions meant to test Taiwan's readiness and stretch its defenses thin. Most of the aircraft fly near or inside Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, a monitored area where foreign aircraft must identify themselves. Every time they appear, Taiwan has to scramble jets, activate missile batteries, and place its forces on alert. And this constant mobilization burns through fuel, parts, and manpower, slowly eroding readiness. At the same time, Chinese naval groups operate just outside Taiwan's territorial waters, conducting live fire drills and practicing blockades. According to Reuters, several of these exercises have simulated missile strikes on key Taiwanese military bases and ports. The pattern is deliberate. Beijing is building familiarity with the battle space while forcing Taiwan to normalize a level of military pressure that, only a few years ago, would have triggered international alarm. Imagine what that means for a small island with barely 24 million people. Pilots flying constant intercept missions, sailors facing radar locks from hostile ships, families living under the low hum of warplanes every morning. Fuel reserves draining faster than they can be replaced, parts wearing out, crews running on little sleep. And yet the world has started to tune it out. When these incursions first spiked, they made international headlines. Now they pass like background noise. That is part of the danger. Beijing is trying to normalize the extraordinary, to make the presence of its military forces feel permanent, inevitable, even harmless. Until one day, a missile launches and no one is sure if it was an accident or the start of the real thing. For Washington, this creates a dilemma that has no clean answer. The United States cannot scramble fighters or deploy warships every single time China sends planes near Taiwan. It would burn through fuel, crews, and nerves. But doing nothing sends a different signal, one Beijing may read as weakness. It is a slow, grinding test of resolve, and it is happening in real time. And here is the question no one wants to answer out loud. How many near misses does it take before one of them turns into a war? That daily pressure is dangerous on its own, but it also hides something more serious. Because behind the constant flights and drills, Beijing has been quietly building the exact capabilities it would need to launch a real invasion. And if that order ever came, here is how it would begin. If Beijing gave the order tonight, the first signs would be easy to miss. Civilian satellites would show what looks like another military drill on the Chinese coast. Ships massing in Fujian, missile trucks rolling into launch positions, aircraft crowding coastal air bases. The difference is that this time they would not turn back. The opening minutes would be silent. Cyber units would strike Taiwan's power grid and command networks, trying to blind air defenses and paralyze communications. At the same moment, waves of ballistic missiles would hit radar stations, runways, fuel depots, and ports. Reuters has reported that several recent Chinese drills already simulated these exact strikes. The goal would be to trap Taiwan's air force on the ground and block American forces from moving in. Then, the sea would move. Amphibious ships would leave Chinese ports escorted by destroyers, heading for Taiwan's western beaches, while paratroopers and special forces attempt to seize airports and government buildings. Within hours, China would aim to create chaos in Taipei and control the island's airspace. And here is what makes this phase so dangerous for the United States. It would all unfold faster than Washington's political system can react. Before the president even addresses the nation, thousands of American troops and families at bases in Okinawa and Guam would already be inside China's missile range. The clock would not start when the war is declared. It would start while the world still thinks it is a drill. The truth is, if Beijing ever moved on Taiwan, it would not have to start with a full-scale invasion. What we just described is the nightmare scenario. A lightning strike designed to crush Taiwan before the world can react. But many analysts believe China might choose a different path, one that looks less dramatic, yet could still strangle the island and shock the global economy. A blockade. Beijing could announce an inspection zone around the island, claiming it is searching for contraband, while its navy physically stops ships from entering or leaving. At the same time, Chinese cyber units could hit Taiwan's ports, banks, and air traffic systems to create chaos without firing a shot. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, even a partial blockade could cut off 60% of Taiwan's trade within days. Global shipping would seize up almost instantly. Taiwan sits on a choke point through which more than half of the world's container traffic passes. Ports from Singapore to Los Angeles would feel the shock within a week. In the United States, fuel prices would spike, airlines would slash flights across the Pacific, and grocery chains would warn of shortages. Stock markets from New York to Frankfurt would plunge, erasing billions in tech sector value. And all of this could happen without a single missile being launched. But a blockade would not be bloodless for long. Taiwan would try to break it, escorting its merchant ships with naval frigates. Chinese forces would shadow them, lock radar on them, and eventually fire warning shots. The first exchange of fire could come not from a formal declaration of war, but from a miscalculation between two patrols in the Taiwan Strait. And if that happens, Washington would have to choose. American law does not require defending Taiwan, but decades of strategic ambiguity have created an expectation that the U.S. would intervene. Breaking a blockade means sending American warships directly into the strait under fire. It means risking sailors' lives to escort cargo ships carrying the semiconductors that power your phone, your car, your hospital. And here is the question no one wants to say out loud. Would Americans accept their sons and daughters dying to keep cargo lanes open around an island most have never seen on a map? A blockade would be the slow path, the path of pressure. But if Beijing wanted to end the Taiwan question in days, not months, it could choose the brutal path, a full-scale invasion. This is the scenario U.S. war planners dread, because it would not be a distant regional clash. It would be a direct war between the world's two largest powers. It would begin with shock. Thousands of Chinese missiles would rain down on Taiwan in the opening hours, targeting air bases, radar stations, fuel depots, and command centers. Cyber units would strike at power grids, communication networks, and satellite uplinks to blind the island. According to Reuters, China has already rehearsed these exact operations during its recent coastal drills. Within the first day, Beijing would aim to ground Taiwan's air force, cripple its navy, and sever its links to the outside world. Then the sea would move. Amphibious ships would push across the Taiwan Strait under the cover of destroyers and submarines. Paratroopers and special forces would attempt to seize Taipei's airports and government buildings. The fighting would be unlike anything seen in the Pacific since 1945. And the clock would start ticking for the United States. Washington could not ignore a full invasion. Carrier groups would surge toward the strait from Japan and Guam. U.S. bombers from Diego Garcia and Alaska would launch long-range strikes. But they would be entering what the Pentagon calls the kill zone, the dense shield of Chinese anti-ship and anti-air missiles built to destroy anything that comes close. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has run dozens of war games on this scenario, and most predict catastrophic losses. Thousands of American troops dead within weeks, multiple aircraft carriers sunk, and bases in Guam heavily damaged or destroyed. It would be the largest U.S. war since World War II. If a full-scale war began to turn against either side, the pressure to escalate would be unbearable. This is the moment strategists call the nuclear shadow, the silent presence of nuclear weapons hanging over every decision in a great power war. No one wants to cross that line, but in the chaos of defeat, the logic of deterrence can twist into the logic of desperation. China now fields over 500 nuclear warheads, many on missiles that can strike U.S. bases in Guam, Japan, and even the American mainland. The United States maintains thousands of warheads on submarines, bombers, and land-based missiles ready to launch within minutes. Neither side wants to use them. But if Beijing saw its invasion collapsing, some analysts warn it could consider a single tactical nuclear strike on a U.S. carrier group or base to shock Washington into backing off. And once a nuclear weapon is used, even a small one, history shows escalation becomes almost impossible to control. The danger would not stop with China and the United States. Russia, already aligned with Beijing diplomatically, could exploit the chaos. With U.S. forces tied down in the Pacific, Moscow might push harder in Ukraine or even probe NATO's eastern flank, betting that Washington would be too distracted to respond. And North Korea, long seen as China's unpredictable ally, could open a second front on the Korean peninsula, forcing U.S. forces to fight on two oceans at once. Pyongyang has over 30 nuclear warheads and a growing arsenal of medium-range missiles aimed at South Korea and Japan, both home to tens of thousands of American troops and families. This is the true fear behind closed doors in Washington and Beijing. A war meant to decide Taiwan's future could spiral into a chain reaction of nuclear threats, regional collapses, and miscalculations that no one can stop. One radar glitch, one hacked warning system, one desperate order given in the dark, and the world could change in minutes. Not just the map, the world itself. For most Americans, Taiwan can feel like a distant dot on the map, a place they hear about only in passing. But if it fell, or even if a war froze its economy, the shockwaves would hit home in days. Taiwan produces more than 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most advanced chips, the ones that power your phone, your car, your hospitals, your military satellites. If those factories went dark, American assembly lines would stop within weeks. Automakers would lay off workers. Electronic stores would run out of laptops and phones. Hospitals would delay surgeries waiting for medical equipment. The economic hit would not stop there. Insurance firms have warned that a war over Taiwan could wipe trillions off global markets in days. Pension funds, 401ks, college savings, all would take massive hits. Fuel and food prices would spike as Pacific shipping lanes shut down. According to the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Chinese cyber units like Volt Typhoon have already penetrated parts of America's power grid and telecom networks. In a Taiwan war, those sleeper accesses could be activated to cut electricity, disrupt banks, or jam emergency services inside the United States itself. And then there are the people. The U.S. has tens of thousands of troops stationed across Japan, South Korea, and Guam. In a war, they would be among the first targets. Many are barely out of high school. They have parents who worry every time the phone rings, kids who draw them pictures while they're deployed. If a war over Taiwan erupts, those families would be on the front line, even if they live in Kansas or Ohio. This is not just about defending an island. It is about defending the invisible threads that hold together the American economy, the American military, and the daily lives of millions of Americans who may not even know how much they depend on Taiwan until the moment it's gone. Even if the United States won, it might not feel like victory. The war would leave behind fleets shattered, stockpiles drained, and debts that would take decades to repay. U.S. defense planners warn it could take 5 to 7 years just to replace the warships and missiles lost in the first months of a Taiwan conflict. In that time, China could rebuild faster with its massive industrial base, while other rivals like Russia or Iran could move to fill the vacuum. This is what strategists call the victory trap. When you win the war, but lose the future. The U.S. could emerge from a Taiwan war with its military stretched thin, its economy reeling, and its global influence fractured. Allies might start hedging toward Beijing, seeing Washington as weakened. And at home, Americans could face years of inflation, higher taxes, and cuts to social programs as defense budgets ballooned to rebuild what was lost. The price would not just be measured in ships or budgets. It would be measured in the lives of those who fought, in the families who lost them, in the trust of a public asked to sacrifice without seeing clear gains. The world might see an American flag still flying over the Pacific, but behind it, an America tired, divided, and less secure. And that is the question few dare to ask out loud. Is it wiser to prepare to fight this war, or to do everything possible to make sure it never begins? The tension over Taiwan is no longer a distant threat. It is a daily reality, building quietly just beyond the horizon. Every radar contact, every warship drill, every intercepted message is part of a silent countdown that no one can see, but everyone can feel. And if that countdown ever reaches 0, the world would not simply change, it would reset. This is why the question matters. A war over Taiwan would not just redraw borders in the Pacific. It would rewrite the rules of global power, shake the foundations of the U.S. economy, and place thousands of American lives in immediate danger. It would shape the world your children inherit, and it would be decided not by ideals, but by choices made under unbearable pressure. We do not know if this war will ever happen, but we know this: preventing it may be the hardest and most important task of our time. Because if it begins, there may be no such thing as winning. If this video gave you a new perspective, Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell us in the comments, should America be ready to defend Taiwan at any cost or step back before it's too late?